Good
Go ahead.
afternoon and welcome to Connect Conversations with Ron and Doug. This is our second episode, and we are live today on Zoom. And hopefully, down the road, we will also be on YouTube Live. They have to do some verification for us. So this week, we are on Zoom. And Ron, it's good to see you again.
Likewise. And hello to everybody.
And we're going to have some conversations today about reliability, getting started with different programs. And we're going to, throughout this episode, open it up to questions. So if you have questions, you can either type them in or I'm not sure how Kim is going to manage those, but any questions that come up, Ron and I'd be happy to answer. And so we
Or
shall.
try to answer.
That's the truth. Sometimes you just try. That's the best you can do. Right. So we're going to get started. Ron, we decided today we're going to talk about how to help, how companies really should get started with an effort, an improvement, continuous improvement effort. And you're probably a guy that deals with that specifically a lot more than what I do. I'm more of an RCM guy, go out and help companies develop maintenance plans, but you're coming at a higher level and say, all right, what are we going to do? How do we get started?
Yeah. Well, a few comments, and I'll bounce it back to you. I guess the flippant answer is just start. A lot of people will see the size of the mountain and rather than tackle it or make a start, they'll revert to form and go back to the day-to-day, reacting to the crises. And, that's easy, and starting the program and being successful is kind of difficult. But I think, my view, you start with some form of executive sponsorship. And to go with that, you have to have this production maintenance cooperation, collaboration, partnership, if you will. And you've got to have some sort of process for engaging the shop floor. I usually start with educating, site manager, VP, president, at that level. Start by educating them on what reliability and operational excellence are all about. And certainly it's not just maintenance, it's a plethora of issues around leadership, alignment, teamwork, that sort of thing. And in fact, just last week, I was with, the president and site manager and a bunch of, senior leaders at a operation. And once they see that, then there are a couple of techniques that I use, and folks can use these without me. I don't really need to be there. One of them is what I call a business level FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis. And it's not a traditional FMEA, as in looking at equipment and looking at failure modes, consequences, and so on, like you would for doing an RCM type analysis. It's a simple high-level review of your production process. Draw a block diagram, have cross-functional teams from each area, and you define a functional failure of the business system, the production system, as anything whatsoever that causes you to lose production or incur extraordinary costs. And so you've got this team in there and you just walk through the system and you ask that question. The questions, well, series of questions, really. It's, what's your biggest production loss here at the beginning? And somebody will say, oh, raw material supply or raw material quality and quantity. And you say, well, how often does that happen? And they'll mumble something and come up with a number. And then you say, well, what's the consequence of that in terms of lost production? And what's that worth to you? Or what's it worth to you in terms of lost productivity of workforce? They're standing around waiting for product, and what's the next biggest one? Well, operator no-shows. What's the next, and what's the consequence of that in terms of lost production or cost? What's that worth to you? And what's your next biggest one? Well, shift, product changeovers or shift changeovers or equipment failures and so on. But what's your, what's your biggest failure? What's the, how often does that happen? What's the consequence of that? How much did that cost you? And you just grind through that, and you may have to go back and validate some of that. And then you take all that information and you prioritize it. Things that are easy to do and have a real high value, you put way at the top of the queue.
All right.
Things that are hard to do and have lesser value get done next. Things that have real high value but are still hard to do, those become projects where you have a project team that you assign. And then things that don't have much value and are hard to do, they might not ever get done. You know, and it's just an easy, simple way. You spend, anywhere from half a day to a day going through one of these for a given, you know, significant production process. And then after that, you say, okay, let's go to work. So
All right.
that's one technique. The other technique is probably one that you're more familiar with, and that is, you know, you you got a problem with a given, machine, whatever it might be, a compressor, set up a pumping station, and you put together a cross-functional team and you make it right. You do a kind of an overview, uh, discussion with the group about what's wrong with it, what do we need to do about that, and so on. And then you go out to the pumping station or the compressor or whatever it might be, and you make it right. You structure a day. Then there's some pre-work that has to be done for that, but you structure a day or whatever it may be. Maybe it's half a day, maybe it's 2 days, who knows? And you make it right. And then you set some standards in place to keep it right. Operating procedures, maybe PM standards, whatever it may be, to keep it that way. And sometimes literally a team or a person gets assigned to keep it that way. So those are, and then you repeat and you repeat and you repeat and you repeat. It's never done, because by the time you get to the last one, the first one will need work again. So, you know, entropy always wins.
All right.
So you got to work real hard against entropy. So those are a couple of techniques. Let me bounce it back to you to
Yeah.
offer whatever you may.
And one of the things that I challenge organizations to do, Ron, is understand there's losses at every level, right? This tends to, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not just maintenance, right? It's operations, it's safety, it's quality, it's even in management and accounting and spare parts. Every organization has losses, and people sometimes get frustrated with this because they say, well, this is just maintenance. They're always on us. They're always saying the equipment failures are on us. And getting all the organizations to participate in this and on a monthly basis report back and say, okay, here's the losses that we're working on in purchasing. Here's the ones we're working on in quality. Here's the ones we're working on in operations. Here's the ones we're working on in accounting and in management, so that this is really a company-wide effort, right? Those cross-functional teams are important, but it doesn't make sense to have a pipe fitter working on what's going on in accounting, right?
Right.
Or what's going on in the storeroom. But it is important for them to understand this is happening in all parts of our organization. It's just not just happening in maintenance. It's not just happening in operations, right? It's all aspects of our business, and I think it's important for people to recognize that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the other thing too, we talked about this last time, I think, and that is, you know, the focus here in the broadest sense of the phrase should be defect elimination. And again, what's a defect? It's any imperfection in your operation. And if you define it that way, there are literally thousands of imperfections in any given operation. And, you just need to identify them, pick one or two and work on it, and then, continue, with that effort. So everybody has defects, you know, So we need to put in place processes that are structured, that have leadership support, that we can, address uh, from time to time in the form of what we said, structured improvement time. So, all right,
Right.
back to you.
And I like what you mentioned earlier about sustaining that, making sure that not only that you do that, you eliminate that, but what do we do to make sure it never comes back? Assigning people to deal with that, reviews to show, all right, we're still watching this, we're still conscious of the fact that we made this change. So far, we haven't seen the loss of the defect return, and we're going to continue doing this business this way, right? To be able to say what we did was successful. One of the other things that I'll often start with people because they can get frustrated. You mentioned on what's your biggest loss. Sometimes tackling the big thing first can be an issue, right? Where
Yeah,
they're
overwhelming it can be.
right.
Yeah,
They get
that's why you pick the biggest thing that's easy to do.
yeah. Start
Right?
simple.
There's
Start simple.
both. You
Let's
have to
make sure we're
consider
gonna
both issues.
right. Let's make sure we're gonna be successful in how we start. So uh trans going into that, it's what do we do for participation, right? Often we get into this where um, and it's not always older folks. I'd like to say that everybody that's hired in, is a wants to go out and tackle the world and solve the world's problems. And then sometimes down the road, we see people that they just don't want to deal with change any longer, right?
Yeah,
How do we
yeah,
get people to participate in things like this? Because one of the things that I have noticed is it's really almost an evolution that people go through, right?
yeah,
They see the program of the month 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, a dozen times, and then
yeah,
the next thing you know, they go, you know what? I've been through this before, and it'll change for a little while, but eventually it's going to go back. So why am I putting my energy into this, right?
yeah.
How do I motivate people that have that type of attitude?
Yeah. Well, I got you know, three three basic steps. Before I get to those, I just wanted to mention one thing, and this is not intended to be a plug for the books, because as you know, being an author yourself, we don't make any money on books. So if whether you buy it or not, I just don't care. And now the publisher does, but for me, it's kind of a never mind. But I I did write a book. Where do we start our improvement program? And it takes you through some of the things we've discussed. It gives a little case studies. And I also wrote another book called A Common Sense Approach to Defect Elimination. And they're small books. They're airplane reads. Easy. So I'll just throw that out there if folks want to look at some case studies in history. Anyways, back to the question. Um, the, you know, in terms of manage, this is kind of along the lines of managing cultural change. And if you want people to buy into a program and not have it be just, I've had people tell me, you probably have too, you're just another pretty face passing through,
Yep.
right? And maybe not that pretty, but you're just another body in transit. So as soon as you're gone, this is all going to be, dismissed, and we'll continue on like we always have. So, but it does go back to the issue of that, again, that executive sponsorship and a structured process for improvement. But, you know, the first step, at least in my mind, is you have to articulate a compelling reason for change. Now, the compelling reason for change can be at the corporate level, real high, like you're on a burning platform, you don't have any choice, or it can be at a local level, like on the shop floor in a machine shop. What's a compelling reason for change? And whatever that may be, you have to articulate it. You have to spell it out and repeat it. You can't just say it once; it has to be repeated. And then the second thing that has to happen there has to be something in it for the guys doing the work, right? If I do this, what benefit, what value do I get? And it's not always money. In fact, most of the time it's going to make your life easier. It's going to make your life simpler. It's going to make you safer. It's going to give you less hassle day to day in getting your job done. And so, and then the third thing is they have to participate. And that's probably the most important reason of all, is that the folks, making the changes have to feel like they have some sense of control, purpose, ownership, that sort of thing. Because, uh, Margaret Wheatley, I think it was, she said, people own what they create. So they have to be a part of the creative process. And if they participate, then they do have that sense of purpose, ownership, control, that sort of thing. And if they do, they're much more likely to buy into the process. And the more times you can repeat that, the more likely it is other, fence sitters, guys that are sitting over there, guys, just in a bunch of crap over there, the more they're likely to say, huh, well, I'll be damned, that looks like it's working. And then you go to them with the same kind of rationale. And, what do you see out there that we need to do? A lot of times your biggest antagonist can be your biggest proponent if they participate and they see things actually getting done. So that'd be my just general observation. Let me bounce it back to you.
Um, yeah, really, it comes down to, in my mind, it's an issue of trust, right? They have lost trust, or they've lost faith
Yeah,
in the organization, right? And that they're appreciated for what they do, right? I've learned, and it took me, I shouldn't say a long time, because it was probably in the first 10 years of my career, working for different types of leaders, the power of just saying thank you to somebody, recognizing them that way, right? Whether you're their lead person, whether you're a supervisor, um, that makes a big difference. And it sounds kind of hokey to people, but it does. It makes a huge difference. The other piece of this around the trust is, and this is something that I have never seen since leaving Kodak, was the transparency of the business. You talked about there has to be a reason for doing this. There has to be a business case. Why are we making this change? Right. When I worked at Kodak, the department that I worked in, and I worked with several different departments throughout my 19 years there, but each month we were given state of the business for our department that we worked in. Right. Did we
yeah,
make money? Right. How did the equipment perform? Did we meet our orders? Um, what were sales like? Were they above forecast, below forecast? What was our net earnings at the end?
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Um, Understanding where your business is makes a big difference in how much you want to be involved in helping that change. Right.
yeah,
We also had transparency at a level that, again, I say I've never seen this. As a tradesperson, anything I took out of the stock room, I got the cost of. Right. If I bought a bearing, if I bought a pump, if I bought a valve, if I bought a, a quarter 20 screw, right, I got the cost of that. Why is that important? Right. Because how many gloves are you buying a week? How many bottles of Leco are you getting? How much Never Seas you getting? Are you using all that stuff before you throw it away? Right. When you start looking at what the costs of all those things are, you go, holy smokes. And I'll never forget, that I worked with a couple of tradespeople that were pretty fussy. One that hated anything in his drawers that wasn't a tool, right? So if you put a bottle of Never Seas or Let Go in there, he'd have a fit, right?
hmm,
This is a guy that he'd take one of them little bottles of Loctite, use it on a few nuts and bolts, and pitch it in the can, right? And you go, hey, dude, that was $25 you just threw away there. What do you
hmm,
mean $25? You don't look at the price when you buy some at the stock room, right? That type of transparency is what people need to understand to get the idea behind. There's lots of ways we can save money and make our business perform better, make our unit cost of product go down, right? And if we do that, that's beneficial to everybody at the company, isn't it?
yeah. and I certainly agree with that. The point, and I agree completely with the point you're making. If people don't know what things are costing, then it isn't costing anything, right? I mean, in their mind, if they don't know, then the company must not feel like it has, much value. But if you tell them, look, this is $1,000, this is 10 grand, and you just wasted it. Now
Yep.
you get that in meetings where people fuss about the cost of things, but I think it's really important, like you said, to be transparent as you can be about what things are costing and what their value they have to the business in terms of lost production, the cost of components, and so on. And then they they begin to embed in their mind that, oh, well, maybe I have a role in helping, improve the output or reduce the cost and that sort of thing. What, just reflecting on, my experience, back in my former life when I was president of CSI, we had those monthly meetings, just like you just described, where we said, here's our bookings, here's our sales, here's how we're doing on a cash basis, here's some new products we've created. And besides that, we'd have Friday lunches where we paid for lunch for people to come to lunch and get briefed.
Right.
So, and get briefed on lots of things. Sometimes it was a new product, sometimes it was a new training course, sometimes it was, just the company itself, and the incentive, of course, you got a free lunch. But I always felt like that was worth far more than we paid, whatever, $5 or $10 for lunch, per person. And we usually have, 30 or so people. Now we had to limit it to some extent because of just space constraints. But yeah, I couldn't agree more that being transparent with people will give them a sense of value associated with the business. Yeah.
All right. And so when we start looking at tools, because we've talked about defect elimination, man, there's a variety of tools. You go into the What Tool When book, so you get a plug for that. But you got root cause analysis, you got RCM, you got Kaizen, you got 5 Whys, you got the list is almost endless, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people
Excuse
get
me.
caught up in that, right? We get all the pyramids that tell people, all right, here's the things you should start with, and here's the things at the top, and all these stuff in the middle. And I often look at that stuff and just kind of pull my hair and go, all right, it doesn't really have to be that difficult,
Right.
right? And uh, just going out and saying, let's solve some problems, right? The other piece of the information that I tell people is, back when I started, it was the operators took data. What was our react time? What was our heat up time? How long did it take us to dump? How much weight was in there? What was the intrinsic viscosity of the polymer when we got done? So all kinds of data that went on. And then we had 5 reactors that made the front end process of this, and 10 different reactors in the back end of it, right? Um, let's compare those, right? Why does one put out more product than 3 and 5, right? How come uh, reactor 10 on the back end is its react time is 20% higher than the other ones, right? Getting people to look at their production data, right? And today, with the computers that we have and all the software and all the information that's available, um, I'm still kind of amazed at how little of it gets looked at, in terms of that process data. How do we get people involved in doing things like that?
Well, I reckon assign them the responsibility to look at it. That being overly complex, you know, I think in a lot of organizations, this digital revolution and they've IoT, there's it IIoT, whatever it is, you know, they we're to some extent we're data rich and information poor. And that's kind of sad. So unless you can convert it into something that's useful to the guy doing the work, it's not very useful.
Right.
And well, like I said, just have them look at it. I did want to make one comment about Kodak. Um, Kodak hasn't fared so well over the past decade or so, but that was because the market disappeared from under them. It wasn't because of any inherent inability to produce a quality product. And I did want to say that the operations that I have been in at Kodak were really quite good, in terms of their, production maintenance processes. So, and the point being here that when you speak personally about your experience, it's based on having done things, pretty damn well. So I just wanted to give you that kudo. So
Well, thank you. And it is one of those things. I'm really grateful for the 19 years that I had there, because I learned things that lots of other places take for granted. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so when I walk into a company, it doesn't matter what they're doing, whether the chemical business or the food business or uh, for instance, for example, I worked with a brewing company, right? And I wanted to start out with an RCM analysis on a particular pump, and I said, well, let's go down and take a look at this and see what we got. And just walking up to this thing, stuff as I learned as a tradesperson, everything you could do wrong with a pump, they pretty much had done, right?
right,
It was mounted directly to a concrete floor. It didn't have a base underneath it, right? It was bolt bound. It didn't have hangers on supply or the suction side of it, right? It had uh, a bend coming right out of the suction. Everything you could do wrong on a pump. You could even see it was misaligned. The coupling, which was actually shedding, right? So there's little pieces of rubber on the floor underneath it. And I just kind of shook my head, and they went, "What?" And I go, "This is all basic trade stuff." Right. And it
yeah,
should be basic engineering stuff, because that's basically, in most cases, the tradespeople install what they're told to do. Right. Unless they've learned something different. And that was probably the difference between Kodak and the other companies that I worked with is if you were going to be a person installing pumps, you went to a Durco training program and you learned from Durco, this is the proper way to install a pump. This is what it
yeah,
needs for suction, straight suction. Here's what it needs, and so on and so forth. The amount of mass required to make sure you get that it holds alignment and your vibration levels stay low. Right. Here's the mass of the foundation that should be there. All those types of things. So
yeah,
that training goes a long way. And then it also helps you with those troubleshooting down the road when you walk in on something with a customer. You say, here's what I believe your problems are. And this
yeah,
is when you go, look, all the maintenance in the world isn't going to deliver a better performance out of that pump until you change some things.
yeah.
So
One other comment I had about information versus data. Uh, Go talk to the guys on the floor and find out what information they need to do a better job.
yeah,
If you want to understand the problems with the work, talk to the workers. I mean, that just seems like such an obvious thing to do, but very often it doesn't happen. And I don't really understand the phenomenon. Maybe people are so busy, you know, fighting fires or looking at charts or staring at a computer screen. They don't actually go out and talk to the folks doing the work. But there's an abundance of information in the minds of those folks doing the work if you just talk to them, listen to them, and engage them. And you said it earlier, or referenced it, and that is just go see them and find out, and ask them what they think should be done. And if that's appropriate, then make sure you go do something with it. And if it's not appropriate, tell them why you can't, because, or if you just don't know, just say, look, I'm gonna have to check into this and I'll get back to you. But then make damn sure you get back to them. you got to build, you said it earlier, you got to build trust and credibility with the guys on the floor, because nothing's really going to change until they do things differently. So
that that gets me to another story of a company that I worked with that they were having product damage, right? And a pretty significant amount, 20, 25%. And they had people working on this project, following this product as it's made, right to the point where it's getting on a pallet and it's being put on a truck, right? In a perfectly good shape. And finally, one of them happened to say to a forklift driver, "Gee, we're having all kinds of problems with product damage on this." And he said, "Yeah, probably been happening for about 6 months, hasn't it?" And they said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact." He says, "They changed the way it's stacked in the palletizer and it hangs over 3 inches off the pallet." He goes, "I'm awful careful when I put them on. So are the rest of the folks because, right, we catch hell if we damage something." He says, "But where it gets taken to, I'm sure their drivers aren't as careful as we are, right?"
yeah,
So it's simple things like that. There's so much that just talking to people makes a difference. Um,
yeah,
you early on described also saying we need to make this part of everyday life. And I think that's one of the mistakes that companies make when they get into improvement efforts is they don't set time aside to do this for people, right? They just say, come in and do your job, and they don't set, and it doesn't take much time a day to do this, right? It doesn't take much time in a week to do this. There's lots of things that can be solved again just by talking to people.
yeah. Well, know, it's kind of sad, but about half the time I go into an operation to, have a look, I go talk to the guys on the floor, or if they allow me time, I'll do that. And they'll tell you what the problems are. And most of them are really straightforward. And, I get credit for being a genius when, the guy on the floor is the real genius. All I did was ask him and he told me, you know, and so it's just, I can't stress the importance enough of engaging the shop floor, having structured improvement time, and of course, having the leadership provide the resources around being able to do something about the stuff. Now, have we got any questions that have come in at this point? I don't know. Let's pause here. I'm gonna,
How would you implement initiatives to professionals? Is there more to that question, Kim?
let me just read the question. So since you mentioned incentives, how would you implement incentives to professionals in plants to understand and partake in a reliability program? It seems that everyone needs incentives today. Well, I've got a couple of observations maybe on that. And, one of them has to do uh, with what reward systems, according to the studies that have been done on this, reward systems work better than and I'll use the phrase incentive systems. Uh, and the point being that if the business does well, if the plant does well, then you reward the plant with enough that it gets distributed in some equitable fashion across the board. On the other hand, if the incentive is, if you make one more widget, you get one more dollar, that can tend to create competition within a functional area, and it can tend to actually create a conflict amongst the group. Let me try to give an example, and then I want to come back to the question itself. Uh, there was a plant I was working with, and the site manager said, "Man, we're going to get production up. I'm going to give a case of beer to the shift that processes the most product. And of course, every month, primarily one shift got the beer. And that went on for a couple of 3 months. And, but the plant wasn't getting any better. The shift was winning the case of beer, but the plant wasn't getting any better. And come to find out, there was one guy who really knew how to run that process on the ragged edge of disaster. Okay. But then he would flick it over to the next shift, and the tanks are empty or the tanks are full and overflowing. And you've got hydraulic systems that are busting at the seams or leaking and aren't getting you the right hydraulic pressure, and so on and so forth, right? And it turned out that that was really a disincentive for the operation of the unit, because one was doing really well to the detriment of the other. In fact, all three of the others in effect. So they changed the reward system to reflect, if the process does well, everybody gets a little piece of it. Now,
Well, there was one person that's tuned in, Ron, that said the beer incentive would definitely work for them.
oh, well, I like dark beers myself, and that, but not too many.
All right. And if I could comment to that, in terms of incentives and rewards, one of the things that I did learn early on was talk to people about what's reinforcing to them what they like,
Yeah.
right? And you'll find out, making that even is the other challenge, but you'd be surprised what people like. I was the person that said, send me to a conference, send me to more training. Those are things that are reinforcing to me. So if we meet
Yeah.
a goal, or I do something in terms of meeting goals, right? This is what I would like. And it could be different. If you've got 5 people on a team, they might want 5 different things. It
Yeah.
becomes a challenge, right? But your objective is to motivate people to continue to do more, right?
Yeah. Well, a couple other comments, and I don't really know if I'm answering the guy's question, but the incentives cannot encourage people to work at cross purposes relative to the success of the business, and that can be quite common in some organizations. So it cannot be to a cross purpose effect, and because then the business doesn't do well. So rewarding the result in an equitable manner, I've found works fairly well. The second comment I wanted to make was, generally money is not a motivator. And I'm sure there are folks out there going, oh, horse crap, and actually Daniel Pink is a really, go to YouTube and, look at some of Daniel Pink's work. But what he says is that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the best incentives for people to do the work. And, of course, getting a pay raise and having a bonus and getting a promotion and so on, but having people feel like they're being equitably or fairly paid, then beyond that, money's not really a motivator. Now, if you don't not fairly paid, it's a demotivator and you quit and go somewhere else. So I think we have to be a little bit careful with incentives, and they have to be what's right for the business. They have to recognize skills. They have to provide some people with some sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and reinforce that. And the benefits are very often, being proud of what you do and that sort of thing. So I don't know if I've answered the question. I'd be glad to take it offline and
All
try
right.
to answer
There's
it otherwise.
a second one that's come in here that says people do hate change and so many reliability programs fail. So how can managers keep workers engaged in it? They they understand the value.
Yeah, well, certainly they have to understand the value. That's the, compelling reason, But, I guess I thought tried to answer this question earlier. Maybe I didn't do a very good job.
It could be
But
somebody that tuned in a little bit later too.
yeah,
So
but there has to be a compelling reason for change. And again, that can be at a very high level or even at a shop floor level. Uh, the second thing, there has to be something in it for them. Now that goes back to the incentive issues, but incentives are not always money. The money has to be perceived as equitable, fair, that sort of thing. But sometimes the incentives is less hassle, smoother, workplace operation, less risk of
changing
injury.
hours
Yeah, yeah,
is one that we got quite a bit. Was employees would say, hey, if we get this, can we go to 4 10-hour days, or can we come in it's 6 o'clock as opposed to 7:30 on Friday, so we get off earlier on Friday afternoon. You'd be surprised what people come up with in terms of those incentives that say, hey, that would make it worthwhile for me.
yeah.
Right.
Well, and then back to the question again. And so many reliability programs fail. So how can managers keep workers engaged in it? They have to understand the value. Yeah, the value certainly has to be there, but those, compelling reason, something in it for them. And then last one is they participate in creating the changes. And I said this earlier, people own what they create. Now, all of that has to be built into some sort of long-term, consistent, and you said it earlier, transparent process. One of the big issues that I see today in most organizations is that managers tend to be in a slot, 2 years, three, long term is 4. And a lot of these changes literally to get the changes made sufficient to see an impact on the business, and then to embed it, inculcate it, uh, lock it down, as it were, generally is going to take years to do. And so if you have a new guy coming in at a leadership level and it takes them, you know, several months just to get familiar with the staff, the process, the culture of that organization. And then maybe after 6 months to a year, they become, relatively productive. And then a year, and then they have to make decisions that are being imposed upon them from corporate. And sometimes those are good, sometimes those are bad. And then, pretty soon they're on the way out the door. And then if you have an organization where you've got 3 or 4 senior managers, site manager, site manager, production, maintenance, maybe engineering manager, and those guys are changing every year. Well, guess what? You're not going to have much stability in your reliability process.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to flounder unless you can get stability in the management team and stability in applying these principles long term, building on success, using what Doug said earlier, transparency, building on success, and, you know, beginning to feel a sense of momentum within the organization. And if you can't stick to it for a year or more, then you're probably going to flounder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things in terms of keeping people engaged that one of my mentors taught me is, early on in your career as a leader, you're often there's that you want to satisfy everybody, right? And this particular fellow told me, stop trying to get them all, get most, right?
Yeah.
Start out with getting most, and the others will come along, right? He says eventually those, when they see that you're trustworthy, that you do the things you say you're going to do, and you continue to do them, right? And you sustain that, those others will come along. So those that want to be engaged, right, work with them first.
Yeah.
Right? The others will come along. And that is a hard thing to recognize. And it's a hard thing to do because you want everybody involved, right? In fact, this guy, I can remember telling one of his people was, you know, I don't care if you don't work with me, but don't work against me.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the people that study this sort of thing, and I guess my experience would be that this is accurate, directionally correct, accurate. Okay, the numbers may not be exact, spot on, but when you're going through a change process, you'll have 20% who are early adopters, right? They love it and they want it and they're enthusiastic because they love the excitement of the change. Whether or not they can lock it down is another issue that has to be addressed later. And then you'll have 60%, maybe fence sitters. They're going to sit back and watch to see if this is just crap or if it's actually going to work. And then you'll have, maybe 20%, may not be that much, maybe a little more than that. Who knows? Depends on the organization. But you'll have 20% or so that are just opposed to it. I mean, we've been through this and it didn't work. And I don't know what the hell you guys are blowing your money on this one for. None of this has ever been worth a damn. And those guys, you eventually get to them if you sustain this, if you have the tenacity and the perseverance to continue on with and building on success and being transparent and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So
And proving and showing that that change made a difference.
yeah,
Right. Here's where we were before. Here's where we made the change. Here's where we are today. Here's what the value of that is. Right. Again, it's that transparency thing. So people understand we're not doing this because we want to put more work on your plate. We're doing this because there's a benefit to all of us for doing it. It's a benefit to the company. Our
yeah,
hope is to make your job easier, not make your job more difficult.
yeah,
Right. And if you do that for people, they eventually will come along. Again, you're going to have those early adopters that are excited about it. You and I had this conversation before we had slightly different numbers, but realistically, it comes down to the same thing. You're going to have that percentage of the population that says, man, I can't wait to get started because, boy, we need to change. Right.
yeah.
Um, and
And then some organizations, it may only be 5 or 10%. I mean, I've been in
yeah.
organizations where the morale was just horrid. It was like a dumping ground for the rest of the corporation. They would take folks and I don't like him, and they would dump them over in this area, and it was just awful. But you found a few that really cared, and then you worked with those, and then you found a couple more who thought, well, maybe this is work, and then you worked with those, and you found a few more, and so on until you never got everybody, and you probably won't either. But the point being that you find those who have some enthusiasm, you build on success, you share the results, you make sure the benefit to them is the distributed, shared. You make it known, and then you go out and get your next one and your next one and your next one. It's a bit like that old phrase of eating an elephant one bite at a time. But start with an area where you have some degree of enthusiasm and which makes a difference to the business, and then build on that and continue to grow it.
All right. So when we get into this, we talk about this. You talked about uh, corporate sponsorship. How important is it going down the road that there's also recognition from that level? Because that's where I
Yeah,
see a lot of places fall down. They'll start with the corporate sponsorship, but that's the last I see it. Well, we're doing this kickoff and they have a special event. And boy, they get started and they start seeing success. And, you know, when it comes down to those local successes, all they see are local people.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Th-
you're making a good point. You know, what I'm stammering here because it hadn't even occurred to me, but you're absolutely right. Uh, I think that executive sponsorship isn't something you do once and you're done, right? It kind of goes with safety again, and that is you're regularly coming to reinforce the successes that you've had, and brag on people and thank people and tell them what a good job they're doing. Or if they're not doing a good job, say, guys, we got some opportunity here. I need some help. Don't beat them with a club, right? Executives need help, whether they're willing to admit it or not.
Right.
They do. And that help's going to come from the folks doing the work a lot of times. So yeah, I couldn't agree more that you can't just launch it and expect life to be good after that. You've got to constantly reinforce it with your presence and your gratitude and all that sort of thing, for the folks doing the work.
So then there's not only is that important, but when you start talking in the corporate world, um, I had this discussion with one vice president. I said, when have you gone back? Right, we had a success here. Have you
Yeah,
gone back? Well, my schedule kind of look. Please put it in your calendar. Get it on there. Don't ignore it. And when you do it, publicize it. Right.
yeah,
And he says, so going there is not enough. I got to publicize it. I said, I want the rest of the organizations that haven't performed as well to be able to see that you're still involved in this, right? That you're still out there saying, hey, look at what they did over here in Springfield. Man, they had a huge success and they went out and we had a celebration,
yeah,
right? Those 5 other divisions should be looking at that and saying, right,
yeah. Let me mention one thing not to do.
right,
Uh, I've worked now with several organizations, big companies, okay, and they'll appoint a vice president of reliability, right, to demonstrate how important it is. And that guy, there'll be some initial enthusiasm. They might even put together a small team. They go visit the different sites, find out what the issues are, and so on. And that's all good stuff. And you've got to do that. Uh, but then they'll go back to the president or whoever the biggest dog is to, tend to this. And they'll say, listen, we got some bigger issues here. So we're going to need thus and such. Well, what do you mean you need thus and such? Well, we do, and here's why. And a lot of times the answer is, well, can you take it out of your existing budget? And so guess what? You try to do that, but that takes away from other things that you had intended. So that kind of puts a damper on things. The next thing you go back and say, listen, boss, uh, we're having this meeting of all our reliability folks or whoever it may be, our Kaizen folks that, pick a, pick a name and we'd like you to come speak and tell them how important this is and offer, your views on what we need to do and that sort of thing. And so when is that? Just like your guy did, when is that? Oh gosh, my calendar's full. And that happens, 3 or 4 times in a row. And then guess what? That VP of whatever reliability is now demotivated. Uh, his team is demotivated. And before you know it, they're looking for another job. And I've seen that happen where they went at it initially with all the energy in the world. And then within about a year, they were so demoralized, they quit and went somewhere else because it wasn't, he, the individual did not have genuine sponsorship. They provide the resources, the time, they actively engage and attend appropriate sessions where they're reinforcing all these principles. From time to time, they'll have to make difficult decisions about, various things. And so that sponsorship, that active engagement is really essential if you want success in a program like this. And it's also essential, as one of the questions earlier alluded to sustain, a program. And one last comment, and I'll go back to you, Doug, and that's, any kind of improvement program or reliability and operational excellence isn't something you do once and it's done.
Right.
You're never done, ever. So it's something that you've got to constantly work on, constantly work to make better. It's a little bit, the analogy I use, it's a little bit like becoming a world-class athlete. What does it take? A little talent and then a whole lot of tenacity. And let's suppose you've achieved some level of superior performance. What does it take to stay there? Same thing. You don't just do it and you're done. You do it and then you sustain it. And it takes the same amount of effort to sustain it because entropy always wins. And if you don't put enough energy to overcome the entropy of decay, well, it'll do just that. It'll decay. All right, back to you.
All right. And in terms of me today, I think we've covered our topics that we said we would discuss. And I'm looking to see if we have any more questions. I don't
Yeah, me
see any
too.
there, see any more there on the board. So, Ron, it's been a great uh, session.
Yep.
And
Pleasure. And
once
thank you
again,
guys who joined us. Thank you for coming. And
yes.
if we haven't fully answered your questions, send us an email or a text or something. We'll try to do a better job. Okay.
All right. And because this is social media, I would urge those that did tune in and attend, please tell your friends, right? That's how this is going to become more of a conversation than it is just Ron and Doug talking each week. And
Yeah.
that's what we'd like to be able to do is to get in there and answer your questions and talk about the topics that interest you.
Yeah.
So,
Or if you thought it was crap, don't. So,
all right.
but hopefully it's been, a little bit beneficial, worth the time. So I want to thank you guys for coming, and, we're going to continue to work to try to answer your questions and provide you with information that you can, take and use somewhere, put into effect.
All right. So this has been Ron and Doug with Connect Conversations, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye bye.